Revelation chapter number 17 tonight. Last week, as we finished up 16, it was the Apostle John sort of giving us the last phase, sort of in a rapid succession of things, the last phase of the tribulation period. You got the tribulation period. Remember, it's a 7-year period we call the 70th week of Daniel. It's marked into 2 parts: the first 3.5 years, the second 3.5 years. The first part leads up to this last day of wrath, of the worst of judgments, is in the last 3.5 years. The first 3.5 years is the unveiling of the Antichrist, his building the coalition of nations to make this 10-nation confederacy. It's also the development of a false church. We call this the false prophet leading this. And this is a church that is trying to unify anything out there and put it under one umbrella. And they don't, no more worship. Of course, the Christians will be gone. The church will be out of there. But there still will be this thing of worshiping God. And so he's going to there's going to be a false God. And he's going to be able to unify the different religions. And it's got to be all the different types of things we see in the world today. It's somehow going to unify the Muslims with groups that's not unified now. And with the force, and we're going to look tonight, especially understand, there's a unity, a marriage of government and church during the last days in the 70th week. And that's very important to understand. And any time in history there's been a unity of church and government has been disastrous. Back in the early days, in the first centuries after Rome, which is in power during John's time here in our book of Revelation, at first they were very harsh and persecuted the church. And then a couple hundred years later, under Constantine, Constantine supposedly had a new birth experience and became a Christian, but he perverted a lot of things by making the Christian church under the umbrella of the nation of Rome, the government of Rome, and church and government was unified then. And it was a terrible time of corrupting the church. And the church and government doesn't work good together. People, in our government says, there's separation for church and state. Well, yeah, we believe in separation of church and state. We don't want the state running our churches. The last thing we want is government in power of our churches. And what we do as a church, we want to have the influence. We want to have a voice. We want to be light. We want to be salt. We'd like for government, like is done in the past, to recognize the authority of God in the lives of people and let our churches do its work. We just want the government to stay away from the church. That's what we want. So the government's always saying, well, we can't have church and state together, which we don't want anyway. Who in the world wants that? But yet the government are always doing things to put controls so the church can have no influence. So they're trying to control the church. And there's always been this battle back and forth. But when you get the church and state all together, and it's still in some countries it is, even non-Christian countries, Islam, the religion of Islam, in Islamic governments where they're united with the Islamic religion, it's a terrible place. I mean, there's oppression and terrible things that goes on. And so anytime it goes together, there's terrible disasters for the people. Well, at the end times, in the 70th week, this is what's going to be. There's going to be the powerful 10-nation confederacy led by the beast, the Antichrist, who's going to use religion and a unified church for his own goals in order to get power and control. And then later he's going to turn against this church and seek to destroy it, so he has nothing but his own glory to worry about and to promote in his world that he lives in. So chapter 17 now remember chapter 16, as we said, we went through the 7 last judgments. Remember, that was called the bowl judgments. And so John basically, in very quickly, rapid succession, says, here's what's going to happen. And boom, 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 down through all these bowl judgments. And they're terrible things, as we looked at last time. And they all lead up to this last judgment of all of this demonic deception, bringing all these armies together on the battlefield of Armageddon. And there on the battlefield of the Middle East, north of Israel, running down the valley of the Euphrates River, all the armies they're going to come together, and they're going to be turning against one another, and they're going to be battling. And it's in the midst of that is when the Lord comes back. It's in the midst of that where Jesus Christ steps out of his glory, and he's going to go with more detail of that in Revelation 19, coming to that point. But he's going to step out, and he's going to destroy the armies of the earth, and Armageddon is going to be the worst of all battles ever fought in the face of the earth. We've had a lot of bad battles, we've had a lot of terrible things, but nothing compares to what lies ahead on the battlefields of Armageddon. And so that's to come, and that's going to be the end of the tribulation. The Lord Jesus coming back, Satan's armies, the old beast will be defeated, the false prophets are going to be defeated, all this is going to be over with. The Lord Jesus will be preparing to set up his 1,000-year reign upon the earth. Now, chapters 17 and 18 is not chronological. Again, sometimes John goes chronological with the study or telling what happened. Then he stops. Remember, we looked at some chapters there in the middle, back in about chapters 11 to 15, and that was a parenthetical group, and he was filling us in about who the beast was, and who the false prophet was, and who the messengers of God were. So he fills in all those things. Then he picked up in chapter 16 and went on again with chronological study of the what lies ahead. Now, chapter 17 and 18, he spends some time through God's revelation of explaining more about what this beast and the mystery of Babylon is. And one of the things that John is trying to get, he's getting revelation from these angels and from God to write down, is that the end times is going to be the height of Babylon. And we're going to look at that. What does it mean by Babylon? Why is it something that just happens at the end, or has it been something that we've seen throughout history? So we'll look at that as we go through here. So chapter 17 starts out, and there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials or 7 bowls. One of these angels that had the bowl judgments, and talked with me, saying to me, Come hither, come here, and I will show thee the judgment of the great whore that sit upon many waters. Now this whore harlot is giving a picture of the impure church, the impure religion. The church is described as a beautiful bride, a pure bride. But this false church is described with some very vivid language that describes that it's filled with idolatry. It's not filled with the truth, not filled with purity and morality and holiness and worshiping of the one true God. And so he shows the many waters. We're going to look down there what sits on the many waters. Some of these things in the first part of the chapter, John sort of describes what the answers are in the second part of the chapter. But basically the many waters is the nations of the world, the kings, the peoples of the world. And so this last false church, this world system that's in place at the end times, engulfs all the peoples of through the world. He says in this verse 2, Then with whom kings of the earth have committed fornication, and inhabitants of the earth have made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Basically, it's just describing all the leaders of the last days and the peoples of the last days have bought into this false religion. And they're ready to worship these false gods that they put before them. And ultimately, the false god that they put before them is the worship of the beast. And because remember, halfway through the tribulation period, the beast takes over the temple that he allows the Jews to build. Remember, and the Jews have this temple, and in the middle of that, he sets himself up as God. And so here in the last days, this last part before the return of Christ is this leader who says, "I'm God," and so and people accept it. People's going to say, "Yeah, he's God," and we saw. Remember, he fakes a miracle. The devil fakes him. It looks like he's been assassinated. Then he rises up, and and he gets all this prestige and all this power and all this, and he has all these. And so people worship him as God, and so he's at the center of this false worship. And so all these people are worshiping him as God, and it's like spiritual fornication, what it is in God's eyes. So he carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names, blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, notice now the woman, remember the woman here represents the false church, The false church is sitting upon the beast. The beast is what? The beast represents the Antichrist and his kingdom. Okay, so the false church is riding on the back of the kingdom of this false world at the end, this Satan-led kingdom at the end. And so it gives us a picture of this, 7 heads and 10 horns. We'll look a little bit this down in our chapter here. The 7 and 10 keeps coming back up, in the study of Revelation. 7 kingdoms and 10 kingdoms at the end. So all that stuff keeps repeating itself. But basically, he's just saying, the unity, the marriage of the political and economic government with the religious government, the religious way of the day. And so, although the church will be gone, there's going to be the religion of the day. It's not going to be a Christ-centered religion. It's going to be this religion that Satan. Satan has always wanted to be worshipped, and what he's going to do, just as the Father sent the Son for us to worship here on this earth, and we know Him. It's like Satan sending this false prophet in, and this beast, and he's indwelling him. And as people worship this beast, in reality they're worshiping the devil. And Satan is going to listen. He sees all the people of the earth worshiping the beast. Ultimately, they're worshiping him. And that's what Satan's wanted. He's wanted that since the beginning. He's fought all of God's creation. He fought it from the Garden of Eden to this very present day, to the very end. I want to be worshipped. And so here's what he's doing, and it's all together here at the end. And he talks about this false church. It's very attractive to the people of that day. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearl, having a golden cup in her hand of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Sometimes what seems to be beautiful is not so beautiful, isn't it? You look at this, and boy, this woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and these are like the most expensive colors in John's days. He would describe that it'd be I can't believe that, and then gold and precious stones, and the false church would be attracting people into it, and Satan would be just enticing. See what I've got for you. See what I got for you. I've given you answers. I'm giving you this. I'm giving you that. And the attraction of that is going to be the demise of the people. And so Satan is sort of, again, what's the name of the game with Satan in the last days? Deception. This beautiful thing that people see is an awful thing. He says it's their hands full of abominations and filthiness of fornication. He said that's what it's really like. And Satan sometimes will disguise his filth with beauty, doesn't he? And I think that's what we see in here. Is John trying to get this vision of this in his head. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery. Now mystery, what is a mystery? Mystery is something that John is revealing with Revelation here. And the mystery of this woman is Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Babylon the Great. So the mystery is this false church. It has its roots in the Babylon. Now in our day, Babylon doesn't have a lot of meaning to us maybe, but in John's day it still had quite a meaning, And we go down through here and understand this understanding of Babylon. In the Bible, Babylon goes way back to the beginning of the days after the flood. After the flood, there was a leader in this world called Nimrod, if you remember them in the Bible. Well, Nimrod was a guy who helped organize this Tower of Babel. And basically, Nimrod was an idolater, and he was trying to get people to worship not the God who created, and God who had, not too long before that, had destroyed the earth and now was getting rebuilt. But he wanted people to follow a different way to heaven. And so he was organizing this, and he began this big Babel project, this big tower project. That's when God stepped in, confused the language, separated people. But from that point on, the spirit of Babel, which later became Babylon, began to infiltrate the systems of the world. There's a history tells us in ancient history that Nimrod's wife was become very influential in the world of idolatry. She was called the Queen of Heaven, and so even in the scriptures we don't hear much about Nimrod's wife and all this kind of stuff. But there's things referring to the Queen of Heaven. Well, what's that referring to? Back to Babylon, back to Nimrod's wife. She also had a son named Tammuz, later on we find one of the places in the Scriptures where the nation of Israel were trying to worship Tammuz. Now, who is that? That's the son of Nimrod's wife. And there was all kinds of stories that it was like Satan was trying to duplicate the Son of God even before he came into existence. He had some stories where the stories of Tammuz was that he was supposed to have been killed by some kind of wild animal. He rose from the dead, and he became this great god. And so that was back after the days of Nimrod. This Satan was already trying to counterfeit the crucified, risen Christ 1,000 years before it happened. Now, you understand this. Ever since Babel, there's been this satanic attempt to confuse people and draw them away from God into different types of worship. And the Scripture sort of describes the last days as this time of Babylon. Babylon the Great. The last before the return of Christ to set up his kingdom to purify all of this stuff is going to be at its height. And so it started out as the Tower of Babel with Nimrod and his wife Semiramis, I think she's called, and their falsehoods, their idolatry, and it influenced the culture so that even in the very days that we're living in, we see the results of that. And in the future, it's going to be at its height yet. So Satan, who began Babel, and later on became the kingdom of Babylon, that philosophy, that system, that way of thinking, that ungodliness is the influence of society even through today. And that's what John's trying to let us see here in the book of Revelation, chapter 17. This end times is going to be full-blown. Okay, it's going to be full-blown of false idol worship. And Satan is going to have a heyday because the church, who's been at least 2,000 years now, we don't know how much longer it'll go. It goes to the rapture. But it's been the influence, and God's Holy Spirit's here. And now that's going to be taken out of the way, and Satan thinks he can have the control of everything. And he's trying to destroy the nation of Israel, and he's all this stuff. So all this stuff is coming down at the end. And then he says, I saw the woman, this false church, the false system of religion, drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered in great admiration. In the last days, there's those who do not accept the false church and the beast, and they want to turn to God. And many of them will, the Bible tells us, but they're going to be despised, and they're going to be persecuted and put to death. You know, the Bible makes it clear, as we've seen through the book of Revelation, any of those who do come to Christ as Messiah during the tribulation are going to be persecuted and martyred. And the blood, they said they're going to be drunk with the blood of the saints. They're going to enjoy killing the saints. And that's not too far. There's parts of the world today, they love killing Christians. You know, if you was a Christian and get yourself caught in parts of the world today, they would love to kill you. It would be a wonderful day for them. That's what he's talking about here. It's going to be worldwide, all those who reject the false church and the Antichrist during that day. And the angel said to me, Wherefore is our marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, of the beast that carried her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. He says, let me tell you some more about this when I get through here. So verse 8 starts the angel trying to explain more. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life in the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Basically, this is most feel that he's talking about the Antichrist, that he was and is not and it shall be, that the Antichrist came on the scene, and it's as if he was martyred or put to death, assassinated, and then rose again. Most people believe that's what John's trying to explain here, is that this Antichrist who has all this power is and who's going to go to destruction, but they come to him, they worship him, those whose names were not written in the book of life, those who are not Christians, those who are not people turn to God, and they're not written in the Lamb's book of life. Who's written in the book of life? Those who are saved. So the unsaved people are going to accept him. Now, again, it's a different era that we're living in. The saved today is the church. Okay, if you're saved today, you're part of God's church. But we believe that the rapture of the church is going to take us away, so if people turn to God there, it's not going to be part of the church, but they can still turn to God. Just like before the church, people turn to God. The church is a very unique dispensation. Okay, if you understand that, it's a very unique dispensation. It's different from the Old Testament, and it's different than yet from the future, the 70th week. And he says, and here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And most believe that, this. If you read commentators, they're going to have different views of this. But in John's day, when you talked about the 7 mountains, which the woman said, the 7 mountains, in most of the time talking about Rome. Most people believe that Rome was supposed to be a hill, a city on 7 hills. And now there's some people don't. You read different commentators, they say, well, John meant that, John didn't mean that. But there's some things that John would have said in his day would have made sense to the people of his day. Maybe not sense to us today because we're 2,000 years removed from it. But the center of power in John's day was Rome. I mean, it ruled the world. And so the beast that was and is not, we're going to go back to verse 10, and that there's 7 kings. Okay, that's verse 10. Now, there's 7 kings. 5 are fallen. 1 is, and the 1 is not yet to come. Now, what does that mean? Well, we said that, when he talks about the 7 kings, or up in verse 9, the 7 heads, remember we said that the Bible talks about 7 world kingdoms. Remember, the first one was Assyria, and Babylon, Medes and Persians, the Greeks, I think I'm missing one in there. Egypt. Egypt was the first one I forgot that. That makes 5. Now what is the 1 is? Well, during John's day, it was Rome, the Roman government. That's the one that is. And then 1 yet to come, which would be what? That would be the end time revived Roman 10-nation confederacy. So he said, I'm in the 1, and 1's yet to come. Now the things that we're looking at the book of Revelation were happening in the 1 that's yet to come. And it says, when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition. It's hard to understand what verse 11 is talking about. He's the 8th. We know that there's going to be 7 kingdoms, and the one that is talking about the Antichrist is going to be the 8th. And the only thing I can understand is John saying he's above the other kings altogether. It's a little bit hard for me to understand it. I really don't get a lot of help from other commentators because I find out they didn't understand it either. So, but that's where I'm going to with that. He's still referring somehow to the Antichrist. I'm not sure what it meant by the 8th, and it's just one of those things I told you. It's a little bit hard to understand in this chapter some of the things he's talking about. But maybe we'll come up a little bit understanding of that a little bit down the road a little bit too, a little bit more understanding with it. He says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. Now that's been something that's been throughout the book over and over. 10 horns, 10 kings, 10 heads. It's that at the end time the government is going to be a one world government divided in 10 kingships, with the 1 king above them all, which was the Antichrist. And that's been something that we've sung over and over again in the book of Revelation. Which have received no kingdoms yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. The 10 will be united. They'll come together and unify and make the beast the leader. Now remember, a lot of this stuff takes place at the beginning of the tribulation. When the beast comes on the scene, the Antichrist, that's the first seal judgment. He comes on the scene as a man of peace, a man of answers, and everybody rallies to him. He's not a man of war when he comes on the scene. He's not a man who looks like the beast. He looks more like the lamb. Again, he's trying to imitate Christ. I'm the peacemaker. I'm here. I'm the Messiah. I got all the answers. But after he gets into his system and gets control and gets the economic system under his control with the mark of the beast thing, you can't buy or sell without that. When he gets all that under control, that's when he turns against Israel, and then we're going to see where he even turns against the leader, the false prophet of the church. And verse 14, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called the chosen faithful. So John reminds us, though, he says the ultimate goal of this beast, the satanic controlled one, is try to defeat Christ. But he said he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it because he says the Lord is King of kings. He says they may have 10 kings on earth. He may think he's the best of kings, but the King Jesus is going to rule and reign one of these days, and he's going to put them in their place when he's done. And he said to me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations. Remember, that's again the false church sits upon the waters, so that's what it is. The waters represent all the peoples, multitudes, and nations of the world he's going to rule over. The 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, they shall hate the horse. So that all of a sudden, somewhere down the line, the leaders who once were in line in marriage with this false leader of the church will turn at a certain point, turn against the church that's in the religion, not the church, the religion of the day, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Basically, he's just trying to describe all of the glory this false religion had at the beginning is all going to be ripped away at the end, okay? And, that's the way it is. Sometimes governments, they like to use religion to get their little advantage for a while. They can use it to gain a little steam, a little political power. But after they get what they want, they don't really need it any longer. Sort of seems a little bit like even modern politics, doesn't it? You watch in 2016, there'll be a lot of religious leaders, a lot of political leaders courting the church. Oh, you got to vote for me because I'm going to be your spokesman. I'm going to be with you. It's funny how when they get in power, they don't always think too much about you anymore. And that's the same thing at the end days, only in a more magnified way, in a more bigger way at the end time. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. In John's day, people would think of the great city as Rome, because that was the greatest city of the day in John's day. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city. So again, the false religion here is described as this great city. Again, as one who has a lot of authority, one who has power, and the one who is going to rule and reign. And in John's day, it was looked at as Rome. Down through the church history, it probably looked at different things. But in John's day, they would know who they was talking about. When John talked about a corrupt system, when he would use things, people of his day would say, well, that would be Rome. If he was a Christian and you was reading a letter and you talked about the corruption and the immorality of a city and all this, you would say, well, I wonder what it means. Well, you know what it would mean. Just like today, if you talk about some cities in a certain way, well, we would know exactly what he meant. And John's people would probably know exactly what that. And so as we look at this chapter, it's just a reminder of us that we have to always understand Satan has always been at work to promote idolatry and false religions. It's always been the idea of Satan to try to get people away from the true God, the Lord Jesus Christ, and get them over on other things. He doesn't want to get them away from religion. He wants to get them away from Christ. Religion is always going to be part. It's, from Tower of Babel, that was religion. It was man's religion, but it was religion. Satan knows one thing. God created all humanity with something in him to worship, that we want to worship something. And ultimately, we should worship God, the Lord Jesus Christ. And in the garden, that was the normal thing. And then there was rebellion in the garden, and then man rebelled against God in so many different ways. And then after the flood, and Noah passed off the scene, and Nimrod become a great leader of the world. And he says, we don't need this God that used to destroy our earth. There's other gods up there. We'll just find that God. And so they begin building the big thing up in the tower, and then down through the ages, Satan keeps deceiving every generation, every millennial time. There's something better to worship out there. There's something better. There's a bigger God. There's a better God, and you just need to worship that. And so Satan's always been working in a false religion, and Satan's always trying to even unify religions together. Sort of like, I guess you call it like an ecumenical type thing, and try to organize people in groups. And the day we're living in, the last part of the 20th century and the 21st century, there's a lot of what's called the ecumenical movement, where let's put down doctrinal differences, and we just need to love one another, and let's come together under one big umbrella. And I don't want, we don't want to talk about just Christ. But if you want, Jesus people can be all right, but you got to also accept these type of people. And let's just get a big umbrella. That's a dangerous thing, because it shows us this thing that John's trying to describe, but that's going to be in full blown power during the 70th week of Daniel, and it's not a very pretty end, a very destructive end to this end time things. So remember, although Satan wants to unify all kinds of things and religions for his glory, it's always true for the church. Needs to always be true to the Bible and the doctrines of the Bible. And you have to say, no, I'm not going to participate with this because I don't believe it's truth. Okay, you've got to always make, is it truth or not, and never align yourself with things that are not truth. And remember, Satan is always a deceiver. He's never one of truth. So as we look at chapter 17, it's just John's sort of filling us in about the power of this one world religion after the church is gone, but yet it has a destructive end. And even the enemies, even Satan and the Antichrist himself turns against it. And eventually, of course, Christ himself defeats them. And we look in Revelation chapter 19 and 20, we see at the end where King Jesus returns, and the Antichrist and the false prophet is cast away like a fire forever and ever and ever. Okay. So that sort of takes us to the end of this chapter. Next week we'll get into this chapter of 18, and it talks more. Tonight was more of the religious Babylon. Chapter 18 would do more with the political and economic Babylon of the end times during John's day.